Orin Carpenter, welcome to the How Humans Work podcast. I'm glad and grateful to have you here with us today.
Oh man, so glad to be here. Thank you for offering and allowing me to come and share. You know, I'm
Yes.
excited. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited too. Um, and I'm excited for you to share. And I'm really curious how we're going to find our way into the sharing. I always know that the sharing happens, but there's so many facets to, your life, the work you do, the stories you hold and what you bring, and then blending it with this idea of society and social cohesion, which is this season's theme. And I always get like a few feelers, like where to go and where to start. But I think I'll just looking at your work, looking at your art online. I will say that the kind of core impression I have of your art, it's overtly social and intensely personal. You know?
Wow, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Not to go too far back, but I knew art even growing up was, I used to say as my superpower because I was a kid who loved comic books. And so I knew art was a way for all to kind of be in the same space, to have different perspectives. But what I love about it is similar to going to a museum when you watch everyone look at the same piece and there are different interpretations and takes on it. But the beauty of it is everyone's in their own space and yet everyone else kind of respects that person in that space, right? There's no anticipated or assumptions of what they might see or interpret. It's just being. Everyone's just being in that space, in their own space, which I feel is missing even today when you talk about social cohesion. So anyway, not to go too far off, but that's the beauty of my art. And as I matured and grew, right, the art changes and grows. And so for me, being middle age, it's at a point to where you're like, not that I always compromise my work, but I think, we go through levels in life to where, we don't want to be confrontational, but yet we don't want to compromise. And then you get to a certain age, you're like, I don't care. I'm just going to be in my
Yeah.
space and I hate to use the term be in my truth because I know that's overused today, but seriously, in my own life, it's at a point to where it's like,
Yeah.
I just want to communicate, and however people see it, that opens up the door for communication, however they feel about it. So yeah. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do want to get into the overtly social aspects
Yep.
of it because I do
Yep.
think you are being in your truth or you're saying things that are very, very clear in a, I don't know how to describe your art. I thought I'm not going to try and describe the pieces that I saw, but it's just mixed
Well,
media,
do that.
amazing energy, uh, irregular shapes, movements, layering. There's just so much to it, and I do want to talk about the overt, the sociality of your feelings in relationship to art and your personhood and the expression that you bring to it. But I would like to start with this noticing, so you noticed that art was a space. So tell me how and what age and like where that feelings of like, okay, this is a place. My word would be a refuge for something. How did that come about in your life?
Oh man. Well, it started early for me, and gratefully to my two wonderful parents. I was blessed to have, both parents in the household, and my mom who supported the art. My dad did as well. But back then, dads were more traditional and pragmatic. It's like, you have to
Yeah.
make sure you can survive. Didn't matter the ethnicity or color. We're talking, 60s. It was like, hey, the American dream is you got to work. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yet he didn't discourage it. It was just mom was more of the person to nurture it. And so every Saturday she would take my brother and I to the library. And the one thing she said is the library is the one place you could be who you want to be, go where you want to go, and not have any limitations. So who was
And
the
she said it
educator?
like that? She just said it
She
like that?
she said it like that. She's an
Wow.
educator. She was an
Wow.
educator for 45 years and taught
Yeah.
kindergarten and the
Yeah.
developing stage. So she knew. And so that's where I first found out about Jacob Lawrence, a lot of the Harlem Renaissance artists who look like me.
Yeah.
And with comic books, Stan Lee, Marvel Comics was the first comics to actually have people of color from different aspects to
Yeah.
where you saw people who were different. And so it was all those elements that kind of came into the point of me drawing. With that, also, I knew I was different. I knew I was different, and I knew because of my difference, right? Skin color growing up in the South. I always tell people I was born 5 months after Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. So you're talking about a city trying to identify itself as well as a little black boy in the South trying to identify itself. So it just all came together with art being that one tool where I felt safe and I could say what I wanted, draw what I wanted, and not worry about, you know, the effects per se at that young age, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So
that was
that's how I
happening in
started.
the Yeah, good. And that was happening
Yeah.
in the library? Like, you'd go to the library and you would explore art, then you'd come home and draw
I,
cartoons or
I it,
comics
actually
or
it was just anything because I love reading. So I would just
Yeah,
read
okay.
stories, and my imagination was just constantly going. And then in the library, they didn't have comic books then, so it was one of those where whenever we went to the convenience store when I was growing up, 7-Eleven was around, and so they used to have the carousels with comic books. And so, the little change that I worked for chores and different things, I would go buy my comic books. And so that's when I then put together the reading and the drawings. Like, wow, what a concept, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of the introduction to it. And then children's books, Ezra Keats, who was a famous children's book artist. Snowy Day is a famous book I think a lot of people might know, and just his style of art. So it was just all these wonderful puzzle pieces, right? Starting to fit for me. It was always these constant aha moments as a little kid, like, ooh, I like that. I like that. So it was just piecing it together, man.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. And then
Yeah.
when did you find yourself in the craft of it, or the practice of, like, I'm actually drawing and either starting with your own comics or starting to create some art?
It just continued. Elementary school, always drew because I struggled in school. I was one of those
Okay.
kids, then it wasn't a lot of, we didn't have a lot of resources like they do today to know that kids had certain, neurodiversities, right? Everyone learns different. Let's start there. We all learn different. I know we like to categorize and separate, right? But we all have a different way of approaching learning. Mine was just more extreme, which I realized, executive functioning disorder. So it's me kind of putting things together. And so I knew I struggled with that. And so art was always that safe space for me to kind of understand things. So it continued, even as a little kid, I just continued to do art through the different phases in life. And so it started at comic books. Then I wanted to be a album cover designer. Why? Because we had vinyl. And my dad loved jazz, and
Yeah.
he was a drummer, and so the album covers of John Coltrane and Thelonious Monk and all of these kaleidoscope covers, like, oh,
Uh-huh.
that's cool. So I went
Uh-huh.
through this phase of different art
Yeah.
careers that I wanted to pursue. So it's
Yeah.
always been a part of me, man.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's beautiful.
yeah.
It's beautiful. It's great. So, you mentioned the Harlem Renaissance, and I heard you in another interview talk about that a little bit. Tell me more about how that influenced you, um, in your creative life.
Wow. So, you know, when I first became aware of, I'll say the artist, because I knew some of the artists before I knew it was an actual movement.
Yeah.
Jacob Lawrence, just his approach to his style was just kind of this. Now I wouldn't say primitive, but it was very simplistic. Um, Simplistic style of art that was just, it was appealing. It was attractive. The color, he used primary colors, just basic, simple approach. But yet the stories that he told were something I related to, right? The migration, just different aspects of kind of the black family and black people in general, right? So that was appealing. And so I knew about him, and I knew about Aaron Douglas. Aaron Douglas, who was the grandfather of the Harlem Renaissance, kind of knew his style of work, just seeing posters that were actually in the library, which when I think about it, it's kind of shocking, especially in the South in the 70s, where, you had pieces like that. And so it was just really admiring their approach to it. As a kid, I could understand it. And it was one of those, unfortunately, you hate to hear this. I think some artists hate to hear this, like, well, I look at someone's art style and I'm like, oh, I can kind of do that, right? That was the appeal. And
Uh-huh.
because as a kid,
Yeah.
you always saw artists on a different level, but some of
Yeah.
their work was like, oh, maybe I
Yeah.
can, recreate that. So that's how it
Yeah.
started.
Yeah.
Then in middle school, studying more about it, the writers. like Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes and all of these greats, and then understanding the jazz aspect because of my dad. So then that's when the other, again, puzzle pieces like, wow, all of these people kind of connect. And
Yeah.
then I think in high school,
And they knew each
is
other and wrote
they
letters and yeah, right.
exactly
They had these
right.
relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. And then that's when it put it together in high school. When I understood and researched more, it's like the Harlem Renaissance movement. And
Yeah.
from that point on, yeah,
Just kind of walked with it, took it on and
exactly.
let it be an
Yeah.
influence. All right.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like we're talking about your influences right now into your creativity. So I just want to invite other places that have informed your sense of art, if there is more that you want to.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, good.
All the jazz musician, jazz was key. I was playing all in my house and then also the masters, right? Caravaggio was one of my favorite. Just because of the dramatic light that he used, and knew
Uh,
about Picasso because Picasso was just, he
uh,
snubbed the art world in the sense to say, I don't care what you think, I'm gonna do what I want to do. And
uh-huh.
so all these influence, and that's the beauty of it too,
Yeah,
was my influence wasn't just people of color, right? It
yeah,
was just great artists or great musicians or people who loved and had a passion for what they did, and you could see it and hear it in their works. That's what appealed to me as an artist. And I think that's when the seed was planted, how artists are the true, conduits to changing the world, right? Because
yeah.
it is universal. It's kind of cliche, you hear it, but it is. We don't have to speak the same language, but we can sit there and look at the same piece and have a nonverbal dialogue and just standing there looking at a piece. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's cool. Appreciate that.
yeah,
Yeah, because I saw
yeah.
your Claude Monet tribute and the way you worked
Yes.
with that. It's really beautiful stuff.
Oh, thank
You
you.
know,
Thank you.
it's kind of a clear, I don't know how you would describe it, but like a reinterpretation with your own feeling of, okay, here it is, and this is how it can live in me, and this I'm gonna emulate this, but do it with me, and it's really beautiful pieces.
And that's it exactly. Thank you for that. That's
Yeah.
exactly how I wanted to approach it, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm trying to keep up with, there's so much cruising through my mind as we're starting here and getting into it.
Yeah.
And one thing that's present for me is I like to draw threads. And one of the thread I draw from my last series of interviews is around what's called the endorphin system. First of all, I am not art educated. I just, it's not my, I know some music, I know some artists, but I just like, there's not a lot I deeply know about. I tend to go towards medicine and myth and science and evolutionary stuff. So it's not my zone. Um, but for me, I'm thinking about the endorphin system, and the endorphin system is our social glue and how we feel and we feel connected. And part of the way we stay in touch, literally, is we have this way we connect. And usually, with a lot of social primates, it's touch. But with humans, we have laughter and ritual and feasting and singing and dancing. Robin Dunbar didn't say art was in there, but I'm imagining art is in there because there's something very self-soothing, like when I journal or when I do, sketch or draw. And I wanted to just invite a little bit of your zone of your arts experience, the states that you find in your relationship with this medium. As a maybe a cohesive force for yourself or as a way to connect with things that you wouldn't have been able to connect with in, an ordinary, walking around, going to the coffee shop experience. Yeah.
Oh,
You know?
wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That's deep. It's, oh, even as I kind of unpack that, it's, various ways.
Yeah.
The typical of making sure that I sketch daily, regardless of what that is, even if it's just while I'm talking on the phone to draw circles. Because the one thing I teach my students, being an educator, art educator, is your hand basically, what an artist strives to do is allow his hand to be an extension of his imagination and eyes, meaning that whatever you think and whatever you see, your hands should be able to duplicate it. I think that's the pinnacle. And that's for me as a draftsman, as one who has the craft. And so with that, the standard thing of just sketching every day, making sure that keep that relationship from hand and eye,
Yeah.
constant. but also just museum hopping, where for me, just going places to see the art, whether that's art in, that's actually man-made art, from sculpture to, photographs, and even the natural art, the beautiful natural world we live in. That's what drew me to California. I say California is God's canvas, man. I mean,
Uh-huh.
when you look at, I mean, I'm pretty sure that we're just keeping it minuscule in California because the whole world, period. And that's why I feel traveling is another essence for me. Traveling is also fuel for me as well. That's artistic for me, is to see the landscapes that are already kind of created and made, right? That balance of God made and man made, if we look at that. So, wow, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's just constant in me. I make sure that whether it's reading, while I'm traveling I love riding trains and public transportation because that allows me to just soak in
Uh-huh.
all that's created, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. I don't know if I answered it, Jeff,
No,
or not, but
you are in your
yeah,
own way. I
yeah,
had a certain kind of my alignment was like the feeling state of being in the studio and the vibes that you get into.
well, that's perfect. You said it because outside of it, that's what it's one of those where I have to feed it. So I go outside of the studio to get that feed, right?
Yeah.
What am I thirsty
Yeah.
for? What am I hungry for? And it's just
Yes.
life, the passion for life, right? People, conversations, all of those things actually add to the creative process. Because my process might begin to where I have a theme. For instance, I know you talked earlier in the notes where we talked about the last series I did was called Breathing Through Change, where
Perfect. Let's go there.
another artist, Aaron Webb, great artist, he and I kind of collabed on this, and the frustrations that I think the world was dealing with before the presidential election, right? The anticipation of where we're going to go, regardless of what direction, where we're going. And I knew for me, it was being, again, this constant of having to figure out a way to deal with that. A black man growing up in, midlife, and you're seeing it's like, oh man, it's just the constant stuff. And how do you communicate that?
Yeah.
And this series with the different layers,
Great.
it was to represent how we feel, different layers that we have. So that's in an essence of what I envision, what I experience, what I hear, what I see,
Yeah.
then bringing it back here, and then just taking all that, and then in the studio trying to figure out what direction do I want to go with that,
Yeah.
and being organic in that, right? Not
Yeah.
not trying to overcompromise or trying to be too I guess directional in it, just allowing that authenticity to kind of overflow. And that's when I moved to abstract art as well. I've delved into different aspects of art. Being a teacher, you have to teach the different aspects for students so they can understand, right, the foundation of it, but allowing myself to be true to my my expression of it, right? And abstract art to me has always been, that's been real. One thing I heard, and I'll end it here. One thing I heard when I was getting my degree, I got my degree in graphic design. It was commercial art. Why? Because they said you don't want to be a starving artist. You got to make a living, right? So
Yeah.
I felt I was kind of persuaded to do that, which is a great experience and beautiful. And I heard going to getting my BA that graphic artists create from without in, and fine artists create from within out. And we always heard that you couldn't be both. And I always had a problem with that. But now, as I'm older, I understand what they were trying to say. They still present it in the wrong way. I think you can be both. You just have to figure out which voice and understand the difference of the voices. Commercial artists, you are trying to portray what the environment in the world has, and you're just trying to kind of recreate that or regurgitate it to what you've received. To where a fine artist is, you're strictly allowing what you feel and how you see things to actually come out of you, not worrying about interpretation or compromising, just being authentic in how you feel and how you want to portray it. So, yeah.
Uh, that's good. No, I feel the engagement and the vitality and the kind of the food. I was thinking like, oh yeah, he's circling the energies and touching things in order to stay engaged and
Yeah.
feed the inner artistry. And as you were talking about it, I was like, oh, I could feel the artist in him living, and he's like, it's like
Yeah.
mixing your paints or whatever you're doing with the way you're living in order to stay connected to this thing that it then can come out.
Yep. That's it.
Did you for a minute, did I catch you say for a minute that you maybe were thinking about being a fine artist before you became a graphic
Oh yeah.
designer?
Yes.
Okay. Was that
Because
difficult?
it was because again, Jacob Lawrence, these were fine artists.
Yeah.
Commercial art became a tag or something new probably in the mid 70s, right? That was the title for commercial art because we're dealing with pop culture and commercialism, right? And that was the beauty of TV commercials and selling things, right? We have to create this aesthetic, visual aesthetic, right? To where it's a different approach to it. And so, yeah, commercial art, and it's like, okay, it's cool, but again, and I remember I had those touchstones because I wanted to be an album cover designer, and there was a point in my life where I wanted to be a fashion designer too.
Oh yeah.
So it was,
Nice.
yeah, it was all these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
But fine art was always the
Yeah.
true essence for me. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it was a moment, yeah, that I
Yeah.
wanted to be a
No,
fine artist.
okay, so I appreciate that. And then
Yep.
you didn't choose that.
Uh-huh.
And I imagine that was an ongoing conversation you had through your life.
Oh yeah.
But first, yes. So I like the idea of seeing you as a young man conceiving, or a teenager even, I don't know when, but conceiving yourself as a fine artist. Like, I'm just like, yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And then, the dilemmas of life, right? Like, oh, I'm gonna be a graphic designer and get into the outside in version of it. And then over time, other things happen. Right? So the
Right.
initial conflict, all of a sudden, maybe it's not as, it's like making the misstep becomes part of the dance almost. So how does it look now, your journey in relationship to art, just because we're exploring your story, and that
Wow.
you had to go commercial, you had to go work 60s dad, you had to find a way to survive, but you had this deep, you know, fine art connected soul, and you had to walk that. You did that.
Wow. Okay, Jeff, this is turning into a therapy session right now, man. That means it's a great conversation. No, it's
Okay,
funny
okay.
as you were
Yeah,
saying, no,
yeah.
seriously, as you were saying that, right when you were asking that question, I haven't visited this part, but wow, I look at the track. It's funny because when I go back to making a decision on what kind of career I wanted, I remember as a graphic designer, one of the things that some of my professors constantly said, even as a graphic designer, working as a freelancer and working in-house graphic design, people always made the comment that, oh, it's a little bit too fine arty. But in the fine arts world, galleries looked at my work, oh, it's a little bit too commercial. So now I want to pinpoint that to being an African American who my mother and father, my dad wanted to make sure he was Air Force. He was in the Air Force, military guy, first wave Vietnam, and one of the things he said was, "Power achieved is power perceived." And so he wanted to make sure that we didn't grow up in inner city. He moved us into suburbia. We were one of four Black families in this new subdivision of over 1,500 families. And I say that to set the stage to where I lived that dual life. I wasn't Black enough because I lived in a white suburbia. When I look at my Black counterparts in inner city and being in an all white neighborhood, oh, you're Black. You're too Black to be here. So there was always this middle ground that I always had to battle. And when I think about the art and I think about even today and I look at my work, and that's what breathing through change was, is it's more of frustration, right?
Yeah.
Because it seems like, and I'm pretty sure you could probably, I think we all can look back and say, it seems like there are more moments in my life to where supposedly considered to society, I wasn't good enough or right enough for whatever reason, right? And it's that's constantly having that battle. And so I
Mhm.
think that's that's the charge in my art, which I love and I welcome that because I feel that's what keeps me true because I'm always having to evaluate, right? In a sense, not to where it becomes too tiring to where it's like, oh my gosh, you're overthinking. It's just making sure I stay true to who I am because of that.
The art emulates life, and life emulates art here, with between the being caught between the racial identity and the life, you were living and lived, and the art and the being between the two. Um, maybe we go towards the racial experience a little bit more, because I really, I think if I heard you right, Oren, I think I heard you say that basically, you had to feel these things. You had to live with these dualities and these inequities. That's my word, not yours. But I'm assuming inequities
No,
or
that's perfect.
in small injustices, small forms of dehumanization, not recognizing, being seen for a singularity of difference. I heard you say this before, that our differences are actually much more complex, which I really liked. I think that's a really good way to, there's initial differences, but then there's lots of nuance there.
Yeah.
But but being true to that is actually a fundamental thing that you negotiate and live with and give voice to, and art is your way of doing that.
Yes,
Yeah.
totally.
Okay.
And what I love about this is, as much as, I unpack and reflect, right? And I always title it beautiful tragedies, right? Or beautiful traumas,
Mm.
and that's that oxymoron to where people assume, why would you say trauma is beautiful? Well, if these things didn't happen, I wouldn't be who I am. And I
Yeah.
think that's what we kind of miss, right? It's painful as much as it is. You have to look at the end product, right? And I won't say end product because we're still growing, but having that foundation to understand that if it wasn't for these things, right? If it wasn't for those tragedies, if it wasn't for those inequities, would I be the person who I am today? And I can honestly say no, because of those things, I had to figure out how to again live life being true to myself. And I'm not saying that's easy, even artistically, right? That's the challenge as an artist. I love a phrase that Picasso said. Picasso told someone in an interview, they said, "Do you ever like what you do?" And he said, "Well, that's a very complicated word when you say like." He said, "Well, I'll say this." He said, "I'll say this. When I'm finally satisfied with the collection of work that I've created or the work that I've done, then I know that means I'm about to die." Meaning that it's ongoing. And that's the beauty of it, right? So, yeah, so I think even in my art, right, there's a pause, even in the work now as I'm looking for this new series to work on. I always tell myself, why does my work have to be so socially conscious? Because I know that's the kind of
Yeah.
work people don't want in their house, man. They don't, oh, that's cute. No, I don't want to look at that every day.
It's not
And
Orin's art
so
if it's cute.
that's
Yeah.
right, right. So it's like, or do I want to settle for creating work that I know will sell? That's always the challenge for artists, especially when your work is socially conscious and when it has such a deep meaning. Not to say that all artwork doesn't, right? But we know some artwork is just for the aesthetics and some has a deeper meaning. And as much as I try, and there have been moments where I've tried to just create work that would just sell, I can't. And so
Yeah.
for me, it's even at a point to say, what is it that you're wanting to say? My work is going back to the art aspect and even the racial tension that we have in the society, right? It's creating a space to where people can walk up and feel how they want to feel, say what they want to say about the work, and not feel guarded, right? In other words, if it's a piece about, there's a piece that I created called "They Never Outgrew Them," and it was a collage piece based on the Alabama or the Birmingham bombing, church bombing, that 4 little girls lost their lives, and it was just baby shoes, their actual shoes that they had on, and they were painted red. And it's a very uncomfortable piece. It's a beautiful piece, from what I've heard from people. But when you really look at it, it's uncomfortable. However, it allows conversation, right? To say, oh my gosh. And it's okay because then someone who's not of color, the one thing you worry about is if I ask the wrong question or say the wrong thing, then I might offend, or I might create this space to where now there's this contention. So you're not feeling like you can be open and honest about what you interpret or what you feel like. Same with African Americans. Okay, I don't want to make it seem like I'm browbeating someone over the head. Like, look what happened with all the years of this. I want to create a space where you both can go in and say, man, wow, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. So that's where I am with my work now. Maybe I
Yeah.
veered off a little bit from what we were discussing, but
Well, that's
um,
okay.
yeah. So anyway, so as I think about, as you talked about, right, those trauma, the artwork, because of those things that happen, this is where I'm at this space with my work and can actually be okay with the purpose of my work. Now, whether that's going to change, probably.
Yeah, yeah,
It probably
yeah,
will, right? As I
yeah,
change. So, but that's
yeah.
the space that I'm at now with that is creating a space to where we can talk about the one thing I say the original sin of America is racism. We still don't want to deal with it, but we have to, so we can move on. That's the thing. We can't grow from it if we don't deal with it. So anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so
sorry.
much denialism right now going on too
Right,
about
right,
that,
right,
original
right,
sin, those original traumas.
right, right. So
Yeah. Well, I love the socially conscious part of what you're saying. And this gets in, I think, use the word artivism, that there's an activism in the conversations. And I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about a couple of your collections. And I thought, because you're saying very specific things, right? So for me now, I know that, okay, for Orin, it's rooted in this feeling that he's true to around what it felt like to be you. And it's a beautiful hurt. It's a difficult gift, the dance, the paradox of what makes us become, right? And I, for me, from my side, in terms of human nature, it's like that's some of the most interesting territory. Certain things happen to a system, someone's life, and out comes these amazing results. Not always, sometimes it's tragedy, right? But often all of us have this capacity that is sometimes only awoken in real adversities, and so that's just an interesting adaptive fact of our life and our soul. And I admire and I appreciate that that's our nature, that in our nature we have that capacity. So I
yeah.
like to I'm highlighting that and I'm appreciating that in you and the way you're owning it.
Oh, I appreciate that. I appreciate it because I feel the one thing I tell people in my workshops is say, we all actually can write a bestseller. We really can. Every person on this earth can write a bestseller. And unfortunately, we live in a society that, I've kind of been shunned for making this comment because I love our country. I love it.
Yeah.
But it's funny. I heard someone make this comment before and it just stuck with me and said, America really isn't a country. It's a business. I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's there. It's there.
it's so, but
Yeah.
in that,
Yeah.
that's the thing of it because of that, I think because of that direction or that takeaway that person had, I think what feeds into the fact of the reason I feel we have so much animosity and contention in this world is because you have so many different groups of people feel that they're not seen or heard because society says you're not seen or heard. And that's why I go back to say we all could write a bestseller because everybody's life is interesting. I don't care what side of the tracks you grew up on. I don't care what your ethnicity is. It's called life, man. And I think until we can get to that point, like right now, what I appreciate with people like you, Jeff, and those who have podcasts where you can actually sit in dialogue. That's what's missing, man. If we could, I think the best thing that could happen in this world, and I know people are like, don't say that. If the world had to shut down and you didn't have like phones or different things where you actually had to talk, all right? And there's a lot that can come from that. But if we create a space to where we actually talked again, to where you realize the similarities and the beauties of each other. So anyway, yeah, so I agree. I appreciate, again, it's going back to those beautiful tragedies is what I can appreciate who I am today. So.
Yeah, no, and it's
Yeah.
not easy. I'm not just for
No.
anybody who's listening. It's not like I don't want to Pollyanna it or pretend like it is
Right.
easy or not even wanted, right? Because there's some that are just too much, right? There's simply
Mm-hmm.
too much that we don't want in terms of
Right.
tragedies.
Right.
Just want to say
Right.
that, but
Thank you for that. Yeah. Thank you for
yeah,
saying that.
yeah, it's good to keep it balanced. It's not
Yes.
all.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
do want to go to this because I really appreciate in your voice and that you're using art as a voice. And I think, the end result or kind of my imagination before getting this conversation is like, okay, what's the connection between how we stay in touch with each other, how we end up cohesive in our society that does feel so fractured, at so many levels, right? I'm like, what's this next theme, right? Similar to you. You're like, what's my next collection about? I'm like, what's my next series of conversations about? And I started to realize that cohesion and social cohesion was like that makes sense to me. I need to turn towards society more. And so you have um these pieces you do, these works. I'm wondering if we can talk specifically about what you're saying back to America, what you're saying back to society, or what you're inviting with. I mean, there's we could talk about the Monet stuff, but I feel like the more American political stuff is the fractured souls and is the breathing through change. And so you mentioned earlier the layers. You have this layering, and you have very specific things. I'd have to look it up, but maybe you probably know it off the top of your head, like this kind of layers. Talk about these layers and what they each mean to you that you brought into the art. And then I'm also curious because I'm like, is each painting a layer, or is the each painting have layers? Because they do morph over. I think there's 15 of them that I saw,
Yeah.
and they're amazing. They're just
Oh,
amazing
thank you.
in terms of just the energy and the conflict that's there, and the pain that's there, and the beauty and the emergence. It's like, so I'm gonna turn it over to you to talk about.
Oh man, thank you for that. So yeah, and I'll start with the last series too, which is Breathing Through Change. As I said, that's kind of a shared collab between another friend of mine, another artist. And it's yes and to that question about each piece layered, and is each piece connected in its layer with each other? Yes. Because basically what this series, if I had to sum up that series, Breathing Through Change, in one word, is conversation. That's what it is. And the layers is the breakdown of all of it. If you can think of this way of us having a conversation, verbal conversation, is the first layer basically is this idealism of what America is, right? The American dream, right? We all can live this American dream. But there's an underline, right? Idealistic, right? This romanticism about it. The second layer basically is where you start to see, and how I do that, and I kind of explain the process too, so people can kind of get a visual of it. It's basically having these beautiful, vibrant colors, is the first layer. And I call it like the underpainting of the abstract, right? I put on these beautiful underpainting, vibrant colors so you can kind of see this morph and this cohesion of all these colors that actually come together. And then the second layer is when I then take a dark tone, and I usually use black to kind of cover those layers. And then what I do is I start to, in certain areas, just kind of lift some of that black paint. So some of the vibrancy and some of the colors can still come through, because it's kind of this masking of this idealism about what America is, right? It's still that basis of America. The American dream is still there, right? But there's this kind of layer that's over it, right? Only certain people can see the vibrancy of it, or the hope, right? Or them actually living that dream, to where others are still trying to figure that out, because undoubtedly their vision is not as clear. And then what happens is the frustration from that, the frustration of understanding that, guess what? This American dream isn't for everyone. It's only for selected few. So the frustration from that then comes from another group. This is where the tagging comes in, because when you look at the history of art, street art wasn't considered real art for years, until probably in the 80s, where then galleries started to allow it to come in, and people like Banksy and different artists who kind of made it popular and in demand, to where that now is the tagging is over those two layers of work, to where usually when you tag something in the graffiti world and the urban street world, is you're actually kind of denigrating what it was, right? If you look at graffiti and think about graffiti, you have these beautiful montages and murals, and then someone would tag with their name and it just kind of ruin it, right?
Mhm,
In a sense.
mhm.
And so that's what the tagging, when you look at the aerosol spray, and I actually use aerosol to actually tag and create this murmur. It looks like a language. It looks like letters, kind of, sort of
Yeah,
numbers, but it's not that.
yeah,
It's basically the frustration, because why? As America, a lot of us can't express how we really feel, right? Because
yeah.
it comes out to be this violent kind of um, antagonistic kind of chatter, right? And so that's the third layer. And then what happens is you then start to morph all three layers together,
Uh-huh,
because it then starts to have the conversation, to
uh,
where even though there's a lot of frustration and protest and anger amongst each other, there's a certain point to where you then can have an actual conversation. Now, this is coming back to the idealistic aspect of the frustration that we have in the division of society, right? Is that tagging actually is an outward expression to everyone that sees it to say, okay, where are we going with this? And then the fourth layer, you see in some of the tagging, you see drips. And the drips are actually symbolizing the tears. And the tears of why are we still at this point? It's the cry for help. It's the cry for us to actually become unified as a country, as a world per se, so we can figure it out. And then what happens is I then come back with another layer of some vibrancy in certain areas to where then that hope starts to kind of shine through that again. And so again, this is all based on a visual interpretation of conversations, right? Of us actually sitting down, being truthful in our feelings of how we feel, but yet doing it in a sense to where I respect your perspective, you respect mine. We hear each other. And as we hear each other, we say, okay, we might not agree, but that's okay, because we still can be respectful and cordial, and then understand that in this area, we might not agree, but maybe as we continue to talk, maybe as we continue to share, maybe as we continue to realize the one common thing we have is that we're human beings, then there's a hope of, hey, well, maybe we can still move forward with different viewpoints, but together as a realistic aspect of a world should be, then that means that the hope is still there. So that's what that series is about, kind of in a nutshell, with the movement and energy of that. So
Yeah. Wow. That's
yeah.
deep. That's really deep.
No,
I
thank you.
really feel
Thank
it.
you.
I really feel
Thank
to
you.
describe it. I mean, the 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 uninformed artist in me or the, undereducated artist in me is like, wow, look at Orin and how well thought out the whole, like, usually I think art, you just kind of make it, you just kind of see what comes out, but it's like, no, it's so intentional. It's like, I love the amount of intention and kind of intellectual clarity that's coming at the medium, that you're
Oh, I
saying it
appreciate it.
in a very specific way, and that's, I guess that's something I didn't really understand. It could be that overt, you know?
Well, and and Jeff, the thing is, and this is something I'm going to correct you on as an art
Okay,
educator,
great, great. Correct me.
and this is the thing about the art world. This is something as artists, I think a lot of artists will share this, because again, I talked about the business aspect of our world, right? With art, right? The appreciation of it. But a lot of people would like to appreciate it more, but a lot of people feel like, oh, because I'm uneducated, I really can't speak on it. Yes, you can. How does it make you feel, man? That's the basis. As an artist, you're like, I want you to describe what you see. If you look at, and the one joke people say is, there are people who actually say, I love dogs playing poker. I really love that piece. You have some art snobs say, that is not real artwork. For me, art is expression, right? Some people say that I can dumb it down too much. I don't care, because it's how art makes you feel, right? When you look at it, what do you get from it? It might not be what the artists, interpret, but guess what? What I love is to hear what someone else sees in the piece, because that means that my piece is speaking to what they need and what they see. And to me, that's more of an honor than them actually understanding what exactly I was saying, to be honest, because they're seeing
Yeah,
something different in the piece. It's living, it's
yeah,
active and living. It's similar to
yeah.
me because of my faith is what scripture is considered a living word, meaning that regardless of how many times you read it, something new comes out of it. That's what I want my artwork to be, man. I want you to look at it like, oh, I hear what Orin is saying. Wow, that's deep. Oh, I can see that. However, I see this over here. That's even more beautiful for me.
I
So
got you. I got
yeah,
you.
yeah.
I would, in the neuroscience perspective, I call that bottom up response, like how somebody responds to it, like that honest, authentic, what
Mm-hmm.
bubbles up, and we need access to that. And then I'm appreciating the top down clarity of creativity.
Appreciate
Right.
that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I'm
Yes.
appreciating that.
Thank you.
And how
Thank you.
how deep that is and how much there's in there. And it makes me curious about, okay, that's good, that's all there. And then, how do we get to those conversations? And I don't know, when you say you do workshops, if you're doing art workshops or you're doing artivism workshops, but do you have a
Yes,
thought
all
or a
of
frame?
those.
Okay, good. Yeah, tell me.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And basically what it is again, how it started with my work with Boston College, definitely after the George Floyd incident, right? To where a lot of teachers who were teaching in inner cities, especially in Catholic schools, you had a lot of teachers who were not of color, but teaching kids of color, Hispanic and African American, Latina, African American, Asian kids. And it's like, okay, how can I still communicate with them to make sure that they're seen and heard. And this was a need and demand. And so Boston College, the Roach Center, they wanted to kind of create a platform for that. And of course, I'm an advocate for art and realize that art is the best conduit to have those conversations. And so I use those workshops in dealing with those conversations, and we use art in different aspects, right? It's creating a piece based on dialogue, based on word association, based on different things, to where it's like, okay, let's sit and let's express this in a different way, right? Because again, conversation at times we can get caught up because we're focusing solely on the right words, the right phrases, and different things, because which is great, because that means that we're thinking of others, right? And how we want to make them feel comfortable in the space. But art allows you to kind of do it in such an organic way to where you're true both to yourself and to each other, because you're just creating in this space, which allows you to pull the guard down. So that's what I do with that, right? And then eventually we then have conversation after we create to expound on what we created and why. So
Sounds powerful. And I'm
yeah.
wondering if you can bring us into the room a little bit of like moments or prompts or things where that healing does happen, or that safe space does happen, or situations. And that, as you're working with educators who are working with youth, right?
Yeah, educators
Yeah.
with youth, and even
Yeah.
some who are not, some who just want to have conversations. I have it open to a lot, but just with the educators, one was where I'm trying to think the actual moment where the piece that they created. And what I did was I gave them six photos, and we kind of looked at them and had them write words of what they felt when they saw this, right? Again, it's dealing with art. What comes to mind? What do you feel in one word? Could you describe it?
Yeah.
And they then had to create a piece from that one word. Like, what did they feel about that? And then one piece that I did, it was a piece that, it was actually something in the civil rights movement, right? One of those famous photographs. And the word that was associated with it was something that I don't think majority of the people would see that word into that, right? And I don't want to go too much into detail because,
Okay. Okay.
it's kind of a shared thing, but
Yeah.
it was when you look at the piece, you see more of despair and violence. And then what someone said was, it was the opposite. It was more of, is not opportunity. I forgot something similar to that word. So it was like,
Yeah. Huh.
elaborate. And what it did was, what the person said at the end was, because of these instances, this is why we're in this class. This is where we're now finally having to speak about the inequality that I think we all have known was there, but because some are able to kind of skim over it and live life without being affected by it. And she was basically speaking because she wasn't a person of color. She said, I can easily tune away from it. I can easily turn my head and keep living my life and not be affected by it because I'm choosing to do so. Being complicit, right? And so she said, so now this is an opportunity for both sides. Opportunity to say, okay, we can no longer say we don't know it's happening because we all experienced it with George Floyd. We saw it, Ahmaud Arbery. We saw these things happen. So now being complicit, now it's an opportunity for me as a person who won't experience that to now understand and see what others are experiencing and be a solution for that. So just in that, right? When you just think about the word, you're like, I don't see how that is, but it allowed her a space to then expound to where we all were like, oh, wow. And so guess what? That created connection for all of us again.
I got
So
goosebumps right now. I'm
yeah,
feeling it. I'm feeling it.
right. So
Yeah.
that's, and again, it's just allowing art, whether it's music, whether it's performing or visual, it allows us to sit and say, let's unpack that. What did you get from this? So yeah,
Yeah. No, it's perfect. It's thank you.
yeah,
That was
yeah,
beautiful, and
yeah.
I feel moved, and I feel informed and inspired by the way you're walking with art. I'm actually thinking about an interview I did with someone who does restorative justice work, and I'm going, yeah, this feels like a form of restorative justice. There's injustices, and through art, they can be accounted for in ways that they can't just through pure, debate. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, it's beautiful.
And it's funny because I love that word, even though society now has turned that word into something negative, restorative justice. because that's what it is. We all need to be restored. That's the beauty of it. It's again, it's we're in a society that seems whenever we speak in terms like this, it's almost if it's kind of wagging the finger, like
Huh.
yes, restorative justice because of no,
Oh, interesting.
it's restorative justice. All of us. It's at a
Yeah.
point to where, again, humankind. If we can now change white America, Black America, Hispanic America, right? Or whatever, to say humankind, I think then it'll kind of change the trajectory on any discussion. Like, for instance, the whole woke movement, right? It's something totally negative. And I tell people, I said, okay, again, we oversaturate and deal with things differently. I say, but let's think about the basic meaning of what woke means. It means that I was asleep for a long time and I finally woke up.
Yeah. Yeah.
We tend to take things in such a negative aspect, even when it comes to art. And I'm turning it back to art. And I think even this socially conscious art, the reason people are afraid to have it in their home is because they're like, I don't know if I want to have that conversation, or I don't know if I want to be reminded, or I don't know. Again, it's because of kind of some of the negative, I think, watch my wording. I guess overtly negative aspects connected to that, right? And I think there's both sides to a lot of things, right? There is a balance. There's good and bad to a lot of things in this world. And I think sometimes we kind of forget one side because of where we are. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. I think we tend to focus more on one-sidedness of a lot of things. And that's the issue. I feel there's a balance. Similar to what you said earlier, there's a balance, right? There's a balance in trauma. Because of the certain traumas that we experienced, there's some great things that came out of it, but let's not forget some of the negative things. There's
Yeah.
that balance, right? That's what helps us, is the balance of it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's painful, it's, natural
Yes.
pain avoidance. We always all avoid pain, and especially if we feel helpless, it feels so
Right.
big, it feels so historical, it feels so overwhelming. That was one of the teachings for me in talking with Robbins, like, the expectation that, I came in the interview, like, there's no way to have an 8.3 billion cohesive world. It's just too big. It's just too much volume. We can't literally process that, but we can process 1,500, 500. We can build small, strong bits of relationship that are so important. And as humans, like, I really love art as a medium and the way you're representing that. And obviously you've been living your life that way. And it's a beautiful service. And I told you before we came in, like, one of the questions I had for you is like, what problems are you solving? What problems are you solving? And I think you're telling that story, basically, solving the need to be able to talk about injustices and inequities and the harder one-sided, or not one-sided, the harder aspects of the American story. And one of the things that's really clear to me when I think about DEI denialism and people who are trying to, whitewash the American story right now is this romanticism and people hanging on to this romanticism. And it's just like, that's like that there's a need and a grasping for that. And it's really kind of sad and it's really kind of painful in the end, except it hurts other people along the way. But I have some compassion for that right now. I'm like, oh, there's people who are really just attached to a very romantic story about America. And so then there's this polarization of people who then go, yeah, no. Yeah, no, it's not just that. No, it's not just that. And
Right.
I live it right here in my gut. It's not that.
Yeah.
And so, it kind of gives me hope in a certain way to see that extreme clarity a little bit, and that there can be more dialogue. So I'm definitely appreciating that.
Yeah. I mean,
Um, hmm,
go ahead.
no,
No,
you.
go ahead. Sorry. Well, I was
No,
just going to
come on. This is, yeah,
I was going to piggyback on what you said.
yeah,
And even those people who think about that, it's funny because you watch certain interviews and hear people talk about it. It's like, you have to remember America was founded on violence.
yeah,
And it was a people who founded it who were outcast. If you did the stories on those, and I'm not trying to minimize what was done to the indigenous people who lived here, right? From those who came. But I remember reading the book and I forgot the name of, I think it was called My Grandmother's Hands. And I forgot the author. It's a bestseller, but he made the comment, right? It's just talking about being Black in America, but he made the comment. He
yeah,
said, what we have to realize is the things that were done to us, and we think about slavery, we think about Jim Crow, those were done to Europeans who came here, right? It wasn't something new. It's almost like It's almost like when you think about an abusive home, right? Most of the times they think about percentages of kids who are abused usually take that trait on. Well, it wasn't like it just popped up and like, oh, I want to be abusive. It
Yeah.
was learned behavior. And similar to those who came here, I was learned behavior. And so again, when you think about that, when you try to romanticize it, it's like, oh, yeah, okay. That's why we have to take it all in to understand and appreciate, right? The bad. Oh, yeah, it was so much bad. But because of that bad, this is what we can get from that. And I think that's where we just have to change the trajectory, not to discredit or forget about, right, the bad trauma or the trauma that came with it, right? But understand from that, right? This is what the phoenix, right? We think about mythology, think about the phoenix rising, right? We're phoenixes, man. We're coming from this ash. We're coming from this and rising above it. That's the key. That's why you want to talk about it, because it's like, okay, we're not going to be here, right? This is where we were. This is where we're going. It's baby steps, but guess what? Steps keeps getting higher and higher. So anyway,
Yeah.
sorry. I was beautiful what you said. I just wanted to
Yeah,
elaborate
no, I'm
on that
glad
a
you
little bit.
piggybacked on it, and it
Yeah.
reminds me of I did watch Joe Rogan interview Ken Burns, the
Mm.
documentarian,
Mm-hmm.
3 hour
Mm-hmm.
interview,
Mm-hmm.
and he's Ken Burns is his group is working on a new documentary. It's about to come out. They've been working on it for 10 years. Apparently, like his projects are like 10-year projects,
Yes. Yes.
and it's on the American Revolution.
Oh. Oh
And
wow.
that interview was the best, most honest appraisal of both the idealism and the beauty and the notion of what American values, or America, I should say American constitutionalism and American freedom was trying to do, with an honest, with the contradictions and the total pain. Like he does such a good job representing the contradictions, but also highlighting that, like, the ideals of America, even though it wasn't widespread at that point, were radical in the history and the story of the world, as in terms of what it was trying to be done. And so I'm really excited for that to come out, and I highly
Yeah.
recommend for people to listen to that podcast. It's a long one, but it gave me the best feelings about America's origins, not in a denialism way, but in an authentic way. So I really understood why this is rare, why the American project is rare, and why it does have value. At the same time, violence, at the same time slavery, at the same time, genocidal, uh, native tribes just collapsed because of, diseases and all the things that went down. And not trying to Pollyanna or wash any of that away, but so really, for listeners, and then I would share for you or anybody, and then I think it's coming out in November. I'm really, really excited to look at that level, because I come from a conservative family. My mom is very much a romantic American person, basically, the founding fathers, and what they were trying to do in the American project. And then at the same time, I'm growing up being like, yeah, yeah, but like trying to find my way into the shadow, right? And trying to honor the shadow, and how do we get this stuff out, and how do we work with it? And I think it's fundamental to cohesion, and I really love what you're doing in relationship to that.
That's the thing. We have to trust even the beautiful side that, we think about it, right? And you think about George Washington, the Delaware, you think about those stories, even as kids, because we didn't know all behind it. The question is, and I heard someone say this in an interview, said, if you understood all that he did and all that was done, would that take away from what he accomplished? No. I mean, that's what we have to really look at all this. And I think that's the problem is we actually take away from the accomplishment and achievement because we're not giving the full story. We then kind of take away from it. Dude, yeah, when you look at it, I mean, it's some rough stuff, right? But at the same time, it's one of those where it's almost too romantic. And someone might correct me, and that's okay. This is just my interpretation, where when you think about the cherry tree, you think about the stories of George Washington, you hear about a lot of the stuff that was done. It's almost at a point to say, how could he be such a brutal leader and fighting that war that he did by being such a nice guy? I mean, it doesn't coincide. And that's what we have to look at our stories, right? We have these wonderful stories of these men who accomplished things against odds, to where you literally had to be, we're talking streets talk here, you had to be a beast in order to accomplish some of these things. So again, not condoning, right? Or justifying. It's just we're dealing with facts when we look at those things, right? It's
Yeah.
especially then how you had to be a violent person for that leadership in that war. You think about when you really listen to the story, and I'm just dealing with the George Washington, Delaware, the battle that they had and what they went against. It's just certain things, and that's why I say for us to, when we think about romanticizing things, I think that's where we take away from it when we don't give the full story.
Yeah.
That's the
No,
thing,
that's a
you
fair
know.
point. Yeah, no, it's real.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know
yeah.
the realities, and that's part of exploring human nature, right? So part of
Right,
the
right,
conversations around human nature, like what are we dealing with and under what
mhm,
conditions and what situations. And so,
right.
yeah, certain people want to romanticize it, but there's something when we look at the complexity and the nuance that someone can be both errant and gifted at the same time. It
Mm-hmm.
gives us some space to kind of I think, work with our own
Yeah,
stories and
I
kind of
love
find
that.
our
Yeah,
way and our
right.
time.
Yeah, yeah.
But I feel like pivoting. How are you
Okay.
feeling?
I
Yeah.
feel bad. Yeah, lead me.
Yeah, I feel like because we talked about Ken Burns, and I know your dad, and I
Mm,
saw your picture on your feed. I know your dad served in Vietnam, and I have a special person who recently passed who was a Vietnam vet, combat vet, and we worked through some of his short stories. He's a short story writer. He took all his pain and all his beauties in his life, and he put them into stories, and some of them are funny. The title of this little collection of stories that he was working on was something funny happened on the way to the ambush.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's like humor, but not funny at the same time,
Right.
and all those realities. And I also know fathers, and obviously, you mentioned your mom. God loves our moms are so amazing. They do so much for us. And for you, art and the education stuff that she brought into your life. But it is part of the American story. And your dad did go to Vietnam, and it things also are felt that way by the next generation. And so I'm wondering if you want to speak to about your father a little bit and about his journey. And yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, this is the thing. I didn't really even know as far as
Wow.
his, well, because from my understanding, he was first wave, so it's more of, I guess, an advisor per se.
Okay.
And
Okay.
that's what's still to me. He passed in 2005, and so all I know is I saw certain photos where I knew he was in Central America. He was in a lot of different areas in the Air Force, and that was kind of the extent of the story. He didn't speak on
Okay.
it much. I knew even for me, when I wanted to, when college, I was an athlete and basketball was my first choice. And that was the first year they passed Proposition 48. So a lot of schools that were offered me something all decided not to. And I actually thought about going to the Air Force. And I remember my dad saying, yeah, no. Said, no. He said, and how he shared it was, he said, because son, I don't want you to have a gun in your hand because that's not who you are. And so kind of left it at that. He was old school, it's one of those do
Wow.
as I say, not as I do. Not as I, yeah, right. More do as I say, not as I do. And so loved him to death. I equate my dad, I don't know if you're familiar with the sitcom Good Times
Yeah.
with
Sure.
J.J.
Sure.
James, John.
Yeah.
That was my dad. That
Really?
was my dad. Yeah. He
Wow.
was funny. He was
Yeah.
great. He was funny, but it was one of
Yeah.
those, he was a stern dad because again, black boy in the South. He
Yeah.
grew up in the South. He's like, hey, you have to make sure that you're doing things this way. So regarding the service, it was great things. I knew both his brothers were in it. They were also Air Force. My granddad was Air Force. And so I knew that was major in our family history. And so again, just knowing about that, him being first wave, just found little bits about it afterwards from mom. And so didn't push more because I'm like, okay, mm, knew he served, knew he was there, and that was the extent of it. But I could tell, just how he raised us, he was a military man, right? It
Yeah.
was one of those where, you had to walk a certain way. You had to make sure that you were upholding not only family name and different things. So you could see the nuances of that, right?
Yeah.
In our upbringing.
Yeah.
And that was a beautiful part, man. I miss dad, love him dearly. I think he gave me a good example of what a man should do. And I just remember this when we moved to California in '99, and it was my dad. I have an older brother, and myself, we actually loaded up U-Haul and put a car in the back and drove it from Memphis here, all three of us. And that was one of the best trips because that was a moment that, even though I felt I got my dad's blessing for a lot of things, the first time to hear my dad tell me he loved me and that he apologized for how some of the things that he did was such a pivotal moment, right? Like I knew my dad loved me. He didn't say it a lot, but you just knew in action. Again, old school. That's how they were, right? You knew I loved you by what I did for you and all these things. But I just remember the conversation. He said, as a dad, where I screwed up was this, and I tried to do this, and I did this. So I just hope you forgive me. And it's like, so, he showed where he was flawed, and so I took that and, that's what I tried to do as a dad to my kids. My son is now he'll be 22 this year. My daughter's 19. So he gave a great model and foundation, right? Flaws and all. And that's what I loved about it. He's like, man,
Yeah.
be better than me.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah. Right on.
that's what we want. I think that's what all of us want,
Yeah,
as we
for
pass
sure.
it on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep
So
getting
yeah,
better. Generations getting better.
exactly. That's it, man. That's the goal.
Yeah.
That's the goal. So yeah. So that's kind of it about
Thank you.
that.
Yeah, no,
Thank you for
I'm
asking.
touched. I'm thinking just, the dad feels and I
Yeah.
love I can't get over. You kept talking and I just kept thinking how he knew like you didn't want to, you weren't, a gun in your hands wasn't the right move. And I'm thinking about the paintbrush and just the art, and just like I'm not sure, like, but he kind of like it's just how deeply he understood your nature, I think is what you
Right.
said, and just what a
Yep.
beautiful thing that is. I did a whole season, my first season, on exploring relationships with fathers, and my question was, how did your father find you? And I really hear that, that, and then I know from my own story,
Mm-hmm.
part of it is later I find my father back when I become a father, and I can understand things that he went through, and now I'm in his position. And so there's just
Yes.
that kind of long conversation,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
happens between the childhood experience of, a man, and my dad was 27 when I was born, and,
Mm-hmm.
I had two older brothers and all that was going on there and our troubled little family unit.
Mm-hmm.
And then later, when it comes back and, a man lives long enough and he can soften up,
Mm-hmm.
he can
Mm-hmm.
soften up and he can open up. And, I think we're lucky enough where earlier on we understood that earlier. And I think
Yeah.
I don't have sons, but I think for some younger men, they also get that's more available earlier than say, the baby boom generation understood.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, oh man, thank you for that. Some wise words. And it's funny because as you say that, I think right now you're right. When I had my son, the first thing I said, I just remember my dad saying, he said, when you have a son, and he lived long enough. I think my son was 3 when he passed
Okay.
away.
Okay.
And certain things, it was funny because I would call him like, hey, what I do? He said, there's some advice that he gave me that was so key. And the one thing I say about my dad was his respect for my mom, right? And that was something that he made sure. One thing my dad told me, he said, don't ever hit a woman, don't ever be disrespectful, certain things, to where even as you got married, he gave a great platform, right? An understanding of how a dad and father should be and a husband. And when I had my son, certain things that he said, the one thing he did say, he said, I want you to be a better father than I was. And he said, I want you to make sure you tell your son that you love him as much as you can. Because my dad didn't. Right.
Yeah.
And that's something I did. Right. And he also said, because in my household, my dad was such a great debater. It was like you knew you weren't winning an argument, man. It was at a point to where I
like,
wouldn't
"Ooh,
even.
ooh."
Exactly. I wouldn't get involved with conversations and arguments. He would just say something like whatever, and then it got to a point, as we all do, become 16. Like I'm a man. Like no, you're wrong. He's like, oh, you want to go here? Okay, right. So I also learned, but he made the point. He said, make sure that you listen. Make sure you're an active listener to your kids. So yeah, man. Yeah, you're right. We're just fortunate and blessed to experience that and to see him change and to understand how a lot of the nuances you see in yourself because of your dad, right? Good and bad, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. I just being fortunate and blessed enough to live with my dad, and to see and know how I want to be better, right? But at the same time, not diminishing or condemning who he was, just understanding, as the old saying goes, when you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so then
Yeah.
that's the thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Fair enough.
yeah,
All right. That's your pops, huh? All right. It's good to get a
yeah.
little window into that.
Yes, thank you.
How you doing?
I'm good, man.
Yeah, man.
Oh
It's
man, I'm
good.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
feeling like we did our job. I'm wondering if you have anything else on your mind that you want to explore around today.
Well, I do just want to kind of end with, first of all, Jeff, I really appreciate the opportunity, man. I appreciate, I love social cohesion. When you mentioned that to me in the email and I sat and thought about it, I'm like, wow, that is so powerful because that's what we're missing. And I think that's what we've been missing as a country for a long time. We've never been, and someone might correct me, but I felt we've never been cohesive as a country. And when you think about that, right? Again, it goes back to what we all share. The similarities that we have. The one main thing is that we're human beings in all of that aspect, as simple as that is, but how complex that is. We're human beings, and when you think about my art, we're layered. And I think the beauty of it is, instead of us trying to diminish and hide the layers, I think we need to unpack and explore more, because then we'll realize the similarities that we have. I heard someone make
Yeah.
a joke about, and I don't know how true this is, I might need to research it, but someone said that Stevie Wonder in an interview, someone asked if they could actually, this was years ago, have the surgery to where he could get his sight back, would he want it? And they
Ah.
said he paused and said, probably not. And they said, why? He said, because then I would judge people on how I see them. And I thought about that because
Damn.
he has to, in order for him, it's conversation, it's hearing inflections of voices, it's all of the nuances and the things that we take for granted as being human beings, to where maybe if we can all see each other for how we sound,
Yeah.
maybe it'll be a different world, right? So I don't know. It's just social cohesion. I appreciate that, man. That's going to be a new term. That might be a new art series that I have, man.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
So
Good.
I'm just letting you know, brother.
You
That's
run with it, and I'll do the
yes,
opening. I'll do the
yes,
opening.
and I'll give you credit, brother, because it's something we need to all think about, and I think that should
Yeah.
be the new mantra for our world today: is social cohesion.
Yeah,
How
man.
can we
How can we
add
do
to
that?
that? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
brother, thank you
Well, I
so much,
appreciate
man.
you. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for the energy and bringing your stories, and I admire your art and your
Oh, thank you.
artistry, and how you're inspired, and how you've just taken your stories and your experience and brought beautiful meaning to them and realness.
Oh
So
man.
thank you for being here today and sharing that with us.
Thank you for the platform, man. I appreciate you.